Right. So Benjamin Nyland from ShareGate is here with us today to talk about governance. And as I was saying before, not just governance in general, but much more specific as to how does it apply to you? Why should you care? And also, how can you get the information that you want to get to the users as quickly and efficiently as possible? So without further ado, Ben, I'm going to make you the presenter. Here we go.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Asif. There we go. Just testing. Can you hear me well?
Yep, I can hear you. I can see the screen as well. All good.
Perfect. So I'll get started. Thanks everyone for joining. Really excited to be talking about governance because hey, it's a heavy burden and the journey can be long and it must be made. There's specific ways to do it. You'll see, by the way, my slides definitely a strong positioning on movies because I watch a lot of movies. But we're going to focus on Office 365, SharePoint, but rather than that, we're going to be asking some pretty important questions. Of course, feel free to ask questions at any point in time in this webinar. So first and foremost, my name is Benjamin Nyland. I was already introduced. I won't waste time on this. You can reach out anytime during this webinar, after the webinar, on Twitter at @bnyland. You can also add me on LinkedIn if you desire, if you want to ask me questions later on. I'm more than happy to help. If I have time, I'll just, hopefully it's not an urgent need, but I'll try to respond as quickly as possible. So feel free to reach out at @bnyland on Twitter. What I do is I work for a company called ShareGate. I'm a head of product there. So I basically come up with new products and I make sure that the products we have are what you need, whether it's for migration, for even governance in Office 365, or reducing your cost in Azure because they keep going up. But don't worry, no product pitch today. The goal is to talk about governance. So let's jump right in. And of course, this is a picture of my dog because I get the same feeling sometimes. Oh, here we go again, another governance talk. So broad, doesn't necessarily apply to me. Or you've done the unthinkable and you've done that 27-page document that's called the governance plan, and you don't even remember where you saved that file because no one's using it. But typically speaking, this is not a new topic, right? And so what happens is that even today, even this year, in recent surveys by am.org, but I see some very similar things on Gartner, and I see similar things from our own data, to be honest. We have a couple thousand users that are using our products every week, and through those users, which are typically IT, we see a lot of telemetry, which tells us that there's a lot of challenges around governance, and we can see that some of the biggest issues and ongoing issues for organizations today, according to this survey, are all related to ultimately governance. I want to align my governance, security, my policies to our business and our other apps. I want to expand the use of SharePoints for more business processes, and I gotta make sure I stay under control of that. And I want to persuade users to manage and share their content in SharePoint and not elsewhere. So that means that not only do we have to increase adoption, but we have to put in place the rails, the guidance, the guidelines to make sure that it's successful, that it brings people back, and that means helping them to use it properly. Unfortunately, if you're here, chances are you're living something, right? Unfortunately, it's rare that people jump into Office 365 or whichever project really and think, okay, we need to plan for our guidance, our governance. Typically speaking, it's already a little late, something happened, things are out of control. They can quickly get there in Office 365 with teams, with groups, with sites, with all of this everywhere. And you're trying to get it back together if possible. So let's jump into that. And I've seen some pretty funky stuff in the past. I think Asif's seen some pretty funky stuff in the past. An entire intranet under the central administration of SharePoint, which is like the admin center, if you will, back in on premises. I'm not kidding. I'm talking about the central admin, which they created a site called intranet, called HR, called sales, and they built the whole thing this way. We're talking about sites with 200 libraries where they go library by library to update a choice in a choice column. And they were pretty annoyed, so they called me. And of course, well, there's a better way for you to use SharePoint. I wish you had read the governance plan, but there you never knew it existed, and that's not what you were looking for. Or people that just take their file shares and just put them in a thing called SharePoint and move on as if it's the same thing and just continue to use it the same way. In fact, let's take a 2-second break. Let's go to Google. Let's go to Google and let's search for something. View all site content. And look at this. We have access to, I don't know if I want to go into them, but I have access to some pretty funky internal networks probably. So if we go inside, we'll see their list, their libraries, because depending on the use, you may have forgotten to lock it down probably, especially on premises. Online, you don't have that word because Microsoft was so concerned that they made it for you. But in on premises, a lot of the times, this was something that was left out. Why? Because we don't have the good guidance. And I think you've heard of governance. I know. But the right guidance, the right governance to get us there ultimately. But now it's not just SharePoint. Right? In the past, yes, and that was already a huge topic all the way back to 2014, 2012, in terms of years, but with SharePoint 2010, with SharePoint 2013, governance is not a new topic. You've heard it, we've heard it, we consistently hear about it, but now we're not just talking about SharePoint. On average, customers use close to 10 products at the same time in Office 365. And let me just add that you may think, oh, he's separating Word and Excel. No, all of the Office suite counts as one product, Office Pro Plus. But people are using all the way to 10 products at the same time, which means that we're not just trying to govern the SharePoint usage, which by itself is a big challenge, but we're trying to govern the usage of all our products within the service of Office 365, from Microsoft Teams to Power BI to Planner to SharePoint to OneDrive for Business to Office to everything. And if I'm not going to dive into Office 365 groups, but I just want you to be aware that every time you create a Microsoft Teams, or every time you create a SharePoint site, or every time you create a planner, you're actually creating a thing called an Office 365 group, which means you're creating all of these products at the same time and gathering them together. That's how it works now. And you're not an exception. This is how it works now. You may have stayed in Classic for a little while, but eventually, whether you're going to be using Teams, or you'll want to use Planner, or you'll want to use Power BI Pro, you're going to be using this method, which means you're going to have to see how can the same IT team, you, stay in control of an environment that's continuously scaling in a self-service model with multiple products at the same time. This is the challenges that we're all facing today. Don't worry, you're not alone. That's why we have these webinars, and that's why we have things like the VisualSP Learning Hub and some of the other things they provide. But there's still hope. Let's avoid this and have governance. The only thing that I'll ask you is to make sure that you go all the way through with it, right? To be prepared to go all the way through, because just creating and answering the questions of governance is not going to be enough. But all right, let's dive in, because you want to get to the good stuff and I want to get to the good stuff. Again, don't hesitate to drop questions at any point in time. We're going to be looking at them, try to answer those questions. A governance is not a document. It's not policing. It's not just blocking and what not to block. It's the set of rules and guidelines. This is the Microsoft sentences. I adjusted them to not just be about SharePoint, but this is Microsoft saying a governance is a guidebook outlining the administration, the maintenance, support of a business's SharePoint and Office 365 environments. It identifies lines of ownership for both business and technical teams, define who's responsible, what areas of the system. Furthermore, it establishes the rules for appropriate usage of SharePoint and Office 365 environments. This is what ultimately your goal is when you're putting governance. You're not putting governance to block certain things. What you want is your desired outcome. You want a well-used, well-adopted Office 365 environment that people are using on a day-to-day basis, but that stays in the rules of your organization and that optimizes for that proper usage. Before you start, You want to make sure that you have a good reason for using the products that are in there. I don't like hearing, and I hear this still today, oh, well, we got free licenses. That is unfortunately not a good answer, right? The fact that you have licenses to use the product does not mean that you should be using the product. You should have a good reason for it. And what I've heard and systematically heard in the past, tell me what SharePoint can do, and I'll tell you what I want. That's the opposite, right? Or we hear, oh, we want to collaborate. What? So the idea is to start from your business requirements. And I don't think I'm teaching you anything with this, but I want to be clear. Even if you're starting with SharePoint, with Teams, you're not just opening a product with features and letting people using features. There has to be a desired outcome, a goal you're trying to attain. And even though for 6 of your goals, it might all be SharePoint, or it might all be Teams, or it might all be Planner, there are different goals and there are different outcomes. Therefore, you'll have different guidelines and use cases that you'll want to bring. And please don't underestimate the platform. This is a scenario that I systematically see today still at customers. And it's not just small customers, it's large organizations as well. We'll just temporarily put it for just us in IT. And later on, we'll figure out governance or what to properly. This never works and has never worked. And I'm talking to you from all the way back in 2007. This simply doesn't work because it just spirals out of control. It's what we call sprawl in some cases, where things have been created everywhere and you don't know anymore what's what. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we know why you want something and what you want to do with it. The first things in any governance, yes, I know a lot of movie references. The first thing in the governance plan, and yes, I'm going to talk about a governance plan, and we are going to talk about a document, but that's the first part. And that's what I mean by having to go all the way through it. In a governance plan, you have to answer the important questions that are relevant to your environment. But the second phase of governance is communicating and implementing it in your environment to your end users. So first, just make sure that you have a team for that group of people that are going to choose this. My recommendation is to always have someone that is not IT, that has, first you have to have the buy-in from the people that have ownership of the service, but also have some people that we call power users, or you always know them, even if you don't have a power user program in your organization. There's certain key players inside of your organization that are in marketing, that are in sales, that are in whatever department that you have, that are a little bit closer to you and understand what the product does and how it works, that you can leverage. And this is probably the only way to be successful with the rest. It's to assign roles and to have clear responsibilities. An example of this, and we have access to a bunch of templates if you want. I think I added the link in the slides. If not, I'll make sure to add it in the chat room in this webinar. But essentially, you have to have your roles. So who's the governance committee? What's an infrastructure administrator, even in Office 365? Service administrators, so that the tenant administration, the application administration, the service settings in the Office 365. Infrastructure administrator in the Office 365 will be more everything related to the infrastructure that you have to put in place, whether it's deploying even Pro Plus across the board, the group policies on people's computers to make sure that it follows the right usage that you want. But then where people tend to stop, it's the site owner or the power user or the group owner, the teams owner, whatever you want to call it, that the clear roles and their clear responsibilities of the people that are going to inherit from these objects that you're creating, especially if you're moving to a self-service model. Now, word of advice, you may be thinking to yourself, oh, Ben, don't worry, we're not putting self-service in place in our organization. It's going to be IT-led, it's going to be controlled. They're going to have to request a site. And I agree. There are some scenarios where that would be better for, depending on your company, your culture. But ultimately, in the service world of Office 365 and Microsoft, you will be going in that direction where more and more will be created by group owners, by team owners, by regular people in your organization. I was having a fun talk with I can't tell the name of the company, but very, very large organization. We're talking few, like close to 50,000 people inside of the organization. And I was telling him about, oh, you should set up power users. And he says, Ben, we have no more power users. We only have power users now, in the sense that everyone in their company is now considered to be someone who at one point in time will become a site owner because of the nature of teams, of groups, of Planner, of Power BI, which means that we have to have clear responsibilities for when you own certain products. And that's where asking the right questions come in. I'll give you a few examples. So for each solution area, who's accountable to ensure that policies are followed? How will accountability be evaluated? How often and by whom? How will the governance plan be communicated to users? And more importantly, what are the expectations around user training? Who takes which training? For example, how are new site owners expected to take any type of training before they get their superpowers? And that's going to be some questions that you'll have to answer. What is the provisioning process to get a new site or team? Does it vary by type or by site requested, by site design, by starting from Teams, by starting from SharePoint, by starting from Planner? How do you make sure that there's a process in place? Will everyone have a OneDrive for Business? I've seen organizations where not everyone can, just because of certain deals inside of the company. What I really enjoy, and I thought, you know what, I'm not going to recreate what somebody else has already made in a really truly great content. And I recommend you go to this URL. It's Susan Hanley's governance guideline questions. I've opened it up here. It's a lot. I'm not going to go through 98 slides, but I recommend you go through Susan Hanley's governance asking the right questions tool, essentially. And what it does is it helps you to go through this slide with your team, with the governance committee, and making sure you know for each of these solution areas who the ownership and accountability goes to. When you go to these decisions, what's our decision going to be about this? Who can provision new collaboration? And what this does is it forces that group of people right away to make these decisions. I've learned this from my personal experience here is you want to have written, right, black on white, the answer to this. Because what happens is as time progresses, you forget what was your stance. You may have a certain answer. Somebody else may have a certain answer. So although I don't encourage you to have a 150-page document, I do strongly recommend you move in the direction of making sure that everyone that is accountable for that governance is sitting down and is doing workshops to answer these important questions, right? What's going to be our expiration policies? What's going to be our naming policy? What's going to be our provisioning model? For what department? For what? Go through all of this, right? And make sure you answer these very tough questions. External sharing, how does it work? When do you want it? When do you not want it? Do you allow people from Coca-Cola.com and Pepsi.com? Or are you going to block one or the other? Are you going to allow anyone to add external users into your environment, or only certain managers, or only power users, or only group owners? How do you define all of these? So what's important is to go through the set of questions that go on for 98 slides in different categories. You don't have to go through all of them. It's only depending on the products that you're using. But if you're in Office 365, chances are you'll be using all of these products at some point. And my recommendation is you go through all of these with that governance committee. You define the roles and responsibilities of who is going to have these calls together, and you move through it. And that's going to create for you that governance plan document, right? But that's not, to be honest, that's not the difficult part. The tough part is actually guiding your users to follow that governance. I was sitting down, I think Asif was telling me this story actually, where someone was not complaining, but like trying to find an answer to how are we going to make our governance plan being followed. But
Yep.
ultimately, when you ask them, right, where was that governance plan, that person themselves did not know where their document was.
Yep. That was it.
That's systematically is a story we hear, and I'm going to tell you the story of when I first started. I wanted to follow the right rules, right? So I went. This was a large customer for me, few thousand users. They were in different locations around the world, in different geographic positions, offices rather. And I thought I'm going to make sure that there's a governance for this SharePoint that we're building because I want to make sure that it's successful, right? I'm in charge of it. I want to be successful. So what do I do? Well, I Google governance plan. Where do I land? Microsoft.com. Do I trust Microsoft.com? Absolutely, I trust Microsoft.com. So I downloaded the governance plan template, right? Which I forget, I think it was around 27 pages. So I went through it and I answered all of these questions, went to my customer who asked for this at the same time, and delivered very proudly a governance plan document with all of the answer to the questions that I recommended that they should put for right environment, for protected environment, for an environment with the right life cycle management. And you know what happened, right? No one read this. Not even the customer read the document because it doesn't apply to their job when they're in their day-to-day job. No one wants to stop, go read a document, and then make sure that it's being applied on a day-to-day basis. Everyone's busy, everyone's got things to do. And opening up a 27-page PDF or Word document will just not work. So our bigger challenge today is not what is governance and do you need governance and getting the right group of people together and answering these questions, because you have great people like Susan Hanley that provided you the template. You have Microsoft who've provided you with the template. And you've heard of governance before, so likely you even came up with a couple of these answers that you wanted to go through. It's just, it's nice when somebody else already did a lot of the hard work to figure out what are all these questions that we need to ask. Once you have the answer to all of this, we need to make sure that the thousands or hundreds of users that you have that are day to day trying to get things done follow this governance, because they're not going to read it. No one in the history of Office 365, of SharePoint, of any projects really that involve the end users for collaboration has leveraged a document to read to know how to use it, right? No one will read it. And after, sadly, I have to say decade now, but after quite a bit of years of doing this, I can tell you guaranteed no one will read it. The only thing that I have seen is finding some form of contextual guidance. Because what are you trying to do, right? In one hand, you've answered all of these hard questions. What are you going to do for naming convention? How do you want people to use it? How do you want people to use it properly? How do you want to increase usage? What does a site owner do? What is that site owner responsible for? Do they change the sharing settings? Do they allow external sharing? Who controls? You've answered all of these questions. But now, how do you insert those guidances? Sorry, I'm French first and foremost, so sometimes it's not the right English word. But how do you bring this guidance contextually at the right moment to these users, right? Finding other methods of sharing them, trying to be as close as possible to what your customer, because that's who they are, they're your customers. And either they're going to buy what you're selling or they won't, and they'll go elsewhere. And they buy something because, and this is what we're expecting today in everything we do, by the way, right? If you're getting any consumer technology, you're expecting it to be contextual to what you're doing based on your geolocation, based on what you're doing currently on your smartphone. Your advertisement is already contextual for many years now. They know who you are and they bring you the right information at the right time. So how do your end users, right? Did you know that the recycle bin like keeps things for 93 days by default, and then after they've been deleted from the recycle bin, they go to a second stage recycle bin? So if you didn't know, well, perhaps you did, but how does end users know? How do they know that that's your governance, that's your guidance, that when something is deleted, it stays for X amount of time that you've modified? And that if it does get deleted there's another process, there's another guidance to go and request it from the second stage recycle bin that we used to call the site collection recycle bin, or still call it this way. So the idea is at that moment where you're in the recycle bin, at that moment where you delete something, how do you provide that guidance? And there's a couple of things. My recommendation is and always will be to incorporate your guidance as well into your training. And this is something I've seen shared from many other people that I trust. And training is a very large term. It can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. In the past, I saw a lot of in-class training. That means that you would stop people from working. They would go somewhere for 3 to 5 days and they would come back trained. I'm not seeing that as much anymore. Of course, we're still seeing it, but in this busy days, in this world of technology and this growing digital transformation that we keep hearing all the time, I'm seeing a lot of other things. And something that you've probably have already noticed is the self-service videos or the short videos. What we've done for one of our organization, actually multiple, including internally here, I can show you right now our training. I'm gonna open up my environment. Here we go. Let's go to, here we go. And hopefully it's going to load quickly. There we go. This is my production environment. Don't tell anybody. But what we have is we have the training. The training, I'm gonna find it very quickly. Bear with me, it's in French. But nowadays, training will be something that you can do in self-service, and that once you go in, I forget which one it's in, but we'll have videos. SharePoint 101, SharePoint in English, 3 minutes. It's because I'm using a Safari browser that it doesn't work. I have to open it up as a separate window. Most people use Chrome or Edge or something or the other. So this will work for you, but we use something called Microsoft Stream, right? Microsoft Stream is a amazing video service. It has been used by the Olympics. It's just under another name, Azure Media Services. But that's what's been packaged and used when we're talking about Stream when you're in Office 365. That technology is, I mean, if there's one thing in Office 365 that I will and have never complained about, it's their video service. It is flawless. And historically, whether it's been here internally or for customers, we make sure that we have videos for training. And then we provide these videos. Either you can go get the playlist and you can dedicate some time to watch the videos. But what we found much more interesting is providing these videos in context at the right moment. For example, you just created a team site. I send you an email with the video because sometimes that's what we were able to do. If I have the capacity to do a pop-up right after you created the SharePoint team site and make the video available there, or as a sidebar, as Asif showed us earlier, I definitely want to put it there. And what we found is to keep the videos below 3 to 5 minutes each. And based on our stats, we saw that close to 87% of our entire user base had watched 100% of all our videos. Why? Because, hey, I've got another 5 minutes. But if your video training was a video of an hour, of 15 minutes, of an hour and a half, not so sure I want to start that video. So what's important is to make sure that you have small video capsules, you put them in playlists, and then individual videos, you embed them or pop them at the right moment for the right person based on what they're doing. It can be documentation, or to be honest, it's more like a communication site these days. I'll create a SharePoint site. I'll make sure that all the pages for the guidance is provided and tagged, and then I'll surface it in the right time. And of course, the best, in my opinion, is contextual help. Depending on what people are trying to do, you provide them in context with that guidance. Right when you're creating a column, hey, here's the importance of these different column types. Right when you're creating a new list or library, hey, here are the couple of things that you should know before you start from. Right when you're starting an approval process, here's a suggestion to use Microsoft Flow instead, or how to use a workflow inside of SharePoint. Why? To make sure that they're using it according to those questions that you had answered earlier, but at the time where they need it. Because no one's going to read your document, no one's going to listen to a classroom training or an hour training and remember it. people will follow the guidance if it's presented to them at that moment. A couple of tips from Susan Hanley, which instead of trying to make up on my own, I will definitely recommend you look at. Make sure that they're integrated everywhere SharePoint is displaying a list or a document library. It's actually a SharePoint page. A SharePoint page means you can press edit and add whatever content you want. So instead of just having people go to your document library, how about adding a little extra text below it, or above it rather, with hyperlinks to those guidance that you had, those guidelines that you provide. If you have your governance pages somewhere, instead of a giant 23, 27 PDF documents, how about creating SharePoint pages or communication pages? I strongly recommend, and tagging them with the subject, with the type of page it is, so that you can roll them up, so you can provide them to the right audience. Again, definitely worth pursuing in this day and age. Always create short content. These are all individual little guidances. Don't make this huge page that no one's going to read, because no one will read it. What you want is small little snacks of guidance that they can use at the right moment, because when you're helping people during their jobs to be done, which is a framework I encourage you to follow, but if you're encouraging or grabbing people towards at the right moment of their doing something, well, you have to make sure that what you're trying to guide them to is a little nudge. It cannot be, oh, you're about to upload a document. Here's a 500-word page on how to do this properly, because they're not going to read it. But if you're uploading a file and you're like, hey, make sure you have this as a naming convention, and here's an example, good to go. People will consume that and will follow your guidance. And always bring this integrated into your communications, whether you're going to use Yammer, whether you're going to use Teams. Try to make sure that you integrate those hyperlinks into the training you provide. What I really enjoyed from Susan Hanley's tips is trust but verify. And that's an important quote, and it's something that I've been talking about for years now, because in Office 365 especially, we have a challenge together. We have a little setting called self-service. It's called something else, but we call it self-service. Do we allow people to create whatever they want, whenever they want, or do we block it? And there's pros and cons for both. I'm not here to tell you, oh, you have to go to self-service because Microsoft's pushing us there, or oh, you have to use blocks so that you can apply all of your governance. You have to find balance, because now you're in a multi-product world. You're in a world that needs to scale, and you're in a world where IT is providing the service of Office 365, the service of productivity, the service of collaboration. That means that in this day and age, it's not so much where people don't know anything about technology and then ask you something, and then in a month you can deliver them a site with all the right settings. They have to be within 5 minutes able to use what they wanted to use, right? And that means that your guidance has to also provide them with, or provide you with, the trust that they're going to do it right and they're going to follow. What I recommend is you put something in place to verify that it's being followed, right? Instead of blocking everything and going through a specific funnel of creation, because the downside of this is people leaving your environment to go to Dropbox, to go to Slack, to go to Trello, to go to whatever else, because that's the challenge that we have today. And you saw it in one of the first questions earlier when I did the AIM.org survey, where the highest request was to try and get people to use the Office 365 platform that they put in place for them. I know I still have a lot of content. We still have a lot of tips for you. Logical architecture. How are you going to organize things? And now we're talking about hub sites. We're talking about in teams that are attached to your groups. We're talking about your team sites, your home sites. Everything in Office 365 comes down to how are you going to logically organize everything? And I do mean logically, right? People have a tendency of saying, oh, he means subsites. You need to stay away from subsites, unfortunately. If this is you learning it today, you must go away from subsites as much as possible. Now, when I say must, it's not the end of the world. It's just that everything moving forward will be targeting sites at the top level instead of your subsites. So if you're creating a subsite or a site called projects, and every time you start a new project, you're creating a new subsite below it, these will never get a Microsoft Teams. These will never get the benefits of the rest of Office 365 because that's not where Microsoft is going at the moment, right? So you really need to make sure that the logical architecture that you plan fits your governance guidance and can help you automatically apply. Because once again, going into these logical architecture concepts, or what I used to call towers, it helps you apply the right guidance automatically. Because as much as you can help these end users, the better. You want to automate the process and provide the little nudges at the right time in context of what they're doing. What we have here is an example where you have an intranet and an extranet collaboration space, and then under it, you have various spaces that people can be collaborating or intent. And today, this will likely be site designs or templates, if you will, that you apply. But when people create a site and they apply a site design or a template, if you will, we should call it a site design now because that's what Microsoft wants us to call it. If we apply a site design, how's everybody doing, by the way? All good? Don't forget to ask questions. Don't hesitate. But if you apply a site design to a site, you just got yourself the intent that your end user or site creator has. An intent means what they're trying to accomplish. If your site designs just say site with 3 subsites or site with 4 libraries, that's not going to help you do anything. Your site design should have in their name the intended purpose of the customer, which is your end users. Collab, project, ad hoc, or community site. And this allows you to put them in a category which you will have identified the right policies. I'm going faster, but I just wanted to see if I can get to my example, which I believe is right here. Before I get to the example, here's some tools in the years that I found could be helpful doing a logical architecture. My favorite is Xmind because it's exactly like Mind Manager, but it's free. So it allows you to do kind of like these little Mind Manager mind maps that allows you to start from, okay, how are we going to organize this? And as you organize, you find categories. And to these categories, you apply this. And this is inside of your governance plan. This is just for you to be able to help people when they create something to have the right list of guidance automatically applied. So when they're creating something in collaboration, they're going to get a certain things, no matter what they choose, that's global to collaboration. Within collaboration, we have site designs or templates or intents, and within them, we'll have different rules, some for lifecycle and some for other things that you have to design. One thing that you have to make sure that you have a handle on, how do you control, how do you categorize, find out the intent of what people are trying to create? So people are going to be creating sites, groups, teams, whatever you want to call these things, no matter where you are. It could even be, we could be talking about a governance plans for your file share right now. What happens when people create a new folder? Do they just create a new folder whenever they feel like it? Do they have no access, but certain people have access to create it when they feel like it because they followed training? Do you block it and there has to be a form that is filled out? I mean, this is not anything new, right? It's just that now we have not only SharePoint, we have Teams, and now we have external sharing, we have Lifecycle, we have expiration, we have Teams chat, it's just our impact is a lot larger than a new folder under the wrong location. So we need to figure out how do people create? And that doesn't mean, oh, self-service or not. It means who can create them, when, why, what are the templates? And if they start from teams, how do we make sure that they also have the right categorization? Are they here for collaboration? Are they here for a project? Are they here for a community? And so that you can apply the right governance to it, the right policies, the right rules. The options you have to create that way of collecting the requirements, there's a ton of them. You can just do a simple email that detects the new site creation and then sends an email to the group owners and says, hey, you just created a group. Can you answer these few questions for me? Or it can be a custom form. Custom form can be anything. Today, that can be Power Apps, but it can be something you've built yourself. It can be, well, I used to say InfoPath, but I don't think that I'd recommend that today. But hey, if it works for you, it works for you. Just know it's not a product really supported in the long run. So how do you collect the information that you need that helps you provide the right guidance. Is it going to be through a SharePoint list? Do you follow it? Do you use Microsoft Flow to automate the process? Do you build your own custom app? Do you buy a third-party software? And back in the days, we did our own custom app, a couple of things put together, and this was what it looked like. It doesn't have to be fancy. It's just, okay, site requests, they go through here, we ask a couple of questions, and then all of the sites that were created, they're following certain guidance based on what they were followed. They have certain days until they expire. What happens when they expire? They get deleted? Did they get archived? How do you archive? Do we ask for renewal? Do you use the Office 365 model? So basically, all of the information that we want, all these questions that you want to try and grab them while people create. And they can be tons of questions. I put a couple here. Of course, you don't want people to fill out a mortgage form to create a site because they're not going to create the site. A lot of things you can gather using scripting, using some intelligence where the name, the email, the phone, the department, the manager, the site name, you already have those. When do they want the site? Or if you don't want to have a desired date, or who's going to be the administrator of the site, who's not necessarily the owner of the site all the time, what is it going to be used for? Because these are templates that apply certain rules that you have, different policies, and Office 365. All these questions of features, of policies. Do you want to add sensitivity to your data, retention? This is easy. You can figure it out. I can send you the documents if you want, but all the options in the admin center, I'm not going to spend the time to go over that. There's tons of info around there. What you need is to find ways to help people at the moment that they're doing something, like creating a site, and asking them or guiding them towards understanding what's going to happen next. And for you, being able to do that means understanding why they want to create it. A couple of examples that we did in the past was like, we'll have these different site templates or site designs, and based on that, we'll have different policies. And then we'll make sure that they're communicated to the group owner or whoever created them once they create them. My favorite way of doing this has been the site agreement. This is the most powerful tool I've ever implemented in Office 365 and SharePoint and whatever. As soon as you create something, whether it's a pop-up, whether it's an email, whether it's a training that's required, I don't care. It doesn't have to be a pop-up that's a site agreement. I just want, if somebody creates something of a certain type, I want them to get a summary. Don't make it a legal document that has 20,000. Make it a summary. Hey, you just created a site. So name of your site, user agreement. This is what you got. This is what you get. This is when we're going to expect some other things. This is what's allowed and not. And here's some link to the governance wiki or pages or communication site. Very, very important. More importantly, how does support work? And I'm pretty harsh on this. If I've provided training in terms of capsules or video capsules, I require, especially in large organizations where we're just like 4 IT people, and we still have thousands of users, I require, and I've tracked this using Stream or whatever, I require the videos to be followed. And I'm not talking about the end user training videos or end user capsules, how to upload a file. I'm saying that every time a new site owner creates a site, or every time there's a new site owner, every time there's a new group owner, I have specific videos for these people, specific to their roles and responsibilities. And for them, I make sure that if they answer a support ticket, if they request one, it validates that they followed the training. If they haven't, no, I'm not going to delete their support ticket, but it goes to the bottom of the list. So it's in the site agreement that they're going to get their answer when we're going to get to their answers, but we're helping the people that follow the training first. And that's part of the site agreement. And because we did this established in the governance committee at first, well, we're good to go. Everyone agreed. Even if it's the VP of whatever who's experiencing this, he was in the governance committee. He agreed to this process. And that's why it's super important to have the committee with the right people. It's important to ask all of these questions and define black and white what the answers are so that they're written, validated, and signed, and then guiding people as they create things to follow these, right? It's all just us trying to answer those right questions asked by the team and set by the committee. And there's tons of things that you should be asking yourself, and I named a lot of them, but this is in the name of the features of SharePoint. And what's the naming convention going to be? What's the expiration policy? So life cycle, how do you allow people to create groups? What's the prevention of content duplication? There's a couple of scripts for you out there. How do you classify sites or sites based on their site designs, or teams? How do you make sure that it works in a hybrid environment? Who has the ownership for regulations and permissions management? Is it IT? Does some of it go to the group owners? Is it the managers of a department? Who can share what to outside of their team? Who can share what to external users? All of these are features that you can set, but you need to have the answers written, and then you have to guide people to that. And a lot of the time is definitely through contextual help. I have this governance guide if ever you're interested that you can download. There's no product pitch in there. It's 100% MVPs and other experts, including some Microsoft people that just wrote content, and it's in this book. But also strongly recommend you watch all, VisualSP webinars and their contextual help and guidances there. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is a set of rules and guidelines that will be easily consumed by those who need it at the time that they need it. That's what a successful governance is. And that's how we're going to get there. I hope that this has provided some insight into a simple governance plan for you to have. And hopefully you're feeling like, whoa, I know governance. Of course, I'm going to stick around for questions. I'm sure there's a ton of them. Or Asif and I will just have conversations around all of this, because this is something we see quite a bit. Again, thank you for your time and your hour so far.
Thanks a lot, Ben. This was definitely very, very informative from my point of view as well. And I appreciate you making time to do this. There's definitely questions out there, and questions that I have in my mind, thoughts that I have in my mind that I want to put forward. You know, the word governance, I'm sure you've seen this also. When you say the word governance, it kind of puts off people at times. It just seems like a scary
100%.
word, right?
Because it's
And
so large and you don't know what's in it. Where do you
exactly,
start?
where do you start? Well, I say you start just like you said a couple of slides ago, is what do users need? Where do they need it? In what format do they need it in? And then just give it to them. You know,
Yeah.
you gotta simplify a thing as much as possible. Don't let governance be a thing that you have to check off with a governance document that you never look at, just like you said. Because I've seen the exact same stories, I've heard the exact same stories, the one that you and I talked about, but there's others like that too. Which, what's the point? You're just wasting money, wasting time, and no one really cares after that.
And the worst part is people not using your Office 365. I mean, ultimately, that's what we want. We want people to use the thing we put in place, and the only way that that's going to happen is if they're using it well. And the way for them to use it well is to provide guidance. And it doesn't have to be like you said. I really love what you said. It's not a one-time governance plan. This is an organic thing, and you can start very small, and it depends on your company. If you're a large financial institution, there's going to be a governance plan moment, of course. But in other situations, you may just want to say, okay, let's start with the creation process. What are the questions we want during creation? What do we want to make sure the group owners, what are they accountable for? But you need to ask these questions and you need to have the answers to be able to provide them with I like to call them little nudges to the right path.
I agree completely. Let me go through a few questions that folks have put out there. We only got about 9 minutes remaining anyway, and I know you and I know it can go on for hours talking about this thing. So, but I think questions from folks who have made the time to be here is super important to both of us. So the first one is
Absolutely.
sort of a comment from Michael. He's saying, making sure, so this is actually in the beginning when I had asked that if there's any specific questions or thoughts you have that you want to cover, Michael had put
Yeah.
it there. He said, making sure permissions meet organizational needs and goals. And you've talked about this quite a bit, right?
Yeah, I
Before.
mean, this is a really good question. I can go in multiple ways. I don't know that it answered specifically your question. What's important is, do you know what those organizational needs and goals are? Because that's that first part. And I encourage you to download that Susan Handley's template of questions and go into the security section of it, so that if you don't know what these organizational goals and requests are, to make sure that you get that group of people sitting down and just write them down. After that, it's just a matter of setting the right features. To be honest, the security aspect of it, Microsoft has provided a lot of ways to control and do that. What's going to be important is two things: is answer the questions, and then set the features in place. But I think that's going to be straightforward in whether it's in Azure AD, which a lot of security settings actually are, and people don't realize, whether it's in Office 365 admin centers. But then after, it's the guidance that you provide in context when people click share, because that little pop-up menu is not that great for people's understanding of what's happening when they press share.
Agree. Agree. It has gotten a lot of people in trouble in the past, from what I've seen.
100%.
Unfortunately.
The default is set to any, like, basically when you click share,
Yeah.
right, it creates a company link unless you've changed the default behavior. It creates a hyperlink that makes everyone in the company. Let me just, while you prepare the next question, I think I have my SharePoint environment very quickly here. So if I take anything and I click on
Mm-hmm.
share, I don't know if I want to do this in this site, but let me go to a test environment that I have. Let's go to Ben demo, right? If a user clicks on share, let's click on business files. If I click share, right, on employee review, I've already
Mm-hmm.
changed the default behavior, but typically it's set to this, right? So people click on share and then they type the name of someone. Say they want to share it with this Benjamin person, right? And they click send. What do they think just happened? They think they just shared this file with Benjamin, but that's not
Right.
what they did. What they did is they created a hyperlink that has the permission within the hyperlink for anyone in the company to access the document, and they sent that link to Benjamin. But then the
Yep.
hyperlink can be found in Teams, in a chat, and it just spreads. And that's the default behavior. So we strongly recommend you go to specific people instead.
Yeah.
Anyways, I don't want to take over that question, but yeah.
Very true, though. Yeah. Some of these things just, I mean, how are you supposed to know this thing? You cannot become a SharePoint guru and just make this your job. SharePoint is just a tool that you're supposed to use to get your job done, not be the
Absolutely.
expert and do that as a job. So, all right, I'm going to move on to the next one over here. Mike is asking, what were governance plan questions? Oh, I'm sorry, where were governance plan questions available? I think he's talking about when you talked about finding it on Microsoft site, right?
Yeah. To be honest, I think Microsoft took it down.
Okay.
But they do have it. I can still send it to you. You can still find it, but there's a SharePoint governance template by Microsoft. It's just that, to be honest, it's not something that I strongly recommend. I'd much rather you go through Susan Hanley's template of questions for governance than you go through that. But I'll try and find it and provide it somehow,
All right.
or send
Yeah,
me a
if you,
LinkedIn or a Twitter or something. I'm not sure.
sounds good. Alicia said this was an awesome webinar. Thank you, Alicia. And she also
Thank you.
had a question over here. Will you post the link again for the ShareGate governance information? That was the first part of the
The book,
question. Yeah.
this one, yeah.
Yeah, maybe you
So
can
this
just
is a
put it in
book
the chat.
with content. Yeah, sharegate.com/governance guide. Straightforward, but just content. Very important
Gotcha.
always.
And there, Alicia also had a question. If sites have been created and training is being encouraged, but there's no governance in place, what do you do?
Well, if sites has been created, what was the question? Sorry.
Yeah, if
And
sites have
train.
been created and training is being encouraged, but there's no governance in place, I guess that's more
Okay,
of
so
a.
yeah,
Mhm.
the training was just the training on what is SharePoint and how to upload files type of thing. So I would start back from the beginning and just answer those questions first from the template. And I hate to be saying that as if it's my escape answer, but and just start from one thing, to be honest. Who do you
Yeah.
want to help and how do you want to help them? If you don't want to start from this whole governance template and like go through all these questions, start from one scenario. How do you want to help the site owners, or how do you want before you start helping everyone, right? So what are the set of rules that you want them to follow to use it properly, and then work back from what questions. But typically speaking, it's better to start from what do you want as an outcome,
Hmm.
answer those questions, and then see how we're going to help the site owner follow those, how we're going to help the administrator follow those, and so on.
Agree.
I don't know, Asif, do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, well, we're of course in the business of, well, had been in the business, I should say, of training, but now I'd like to think of it as we're mostly in the business of helping and supporting and then just training. Because to me, in my mind, when I think of training is somebody has to remember what you taught them and then they have to apply it later. While contextual help or contextual learning is I learn, I apply, I learn and I apply. So the example that you gave, and I'm very, very specific, you talked about the recycle bin. See,
Yeah.
in the classic recycle bin, oddly, in the classic recycle bin, there's an informational icon in inline help by Microsoft. And in there, it says when you click on it that it's going to be there for 93 days. After 93 days, the information will go away from here. In the modern recycle bin, there is no informational icon. So you are just guessing as to, hey, how many days is going to be here? Or my information is not here anymore. Where did it go? Because it was
Yeah.
literally 100 days ago. So we as a company, basically, we did that. We put the inline help icon in the modern recycle bin because it's not there. So we put it there to bring it into parity with with the classic stuff. And sometimes the vendor Microsoft does it. Sometimes a vendor like us does it to supply information like that. And same thing here with what Alicia is asking. If you have any type of information you want to give to users, don't even think of that as training. Just think of that as information or policy communication that you're doing, however you want to do it, the best way, the most efficient way possible. So don't overthink it is my uh, suggestion. Just get the information to them as efficiently, quickly as possible because they'll thank you for that and they'll just help them get their job done.
Absolutely.
Uh, I think we have time for one more question before we have to split from here. Jim is asking, just curious, what are you seeing about how companies are specifically storing their governance information? I have seen SharePoint sites called governance, a dedicated team, a wiki, and a one bug document. All of these includes videos, of course.
Yeah, I mean that's the example that I've seen most of the time is a governance site, communication site nowadays. That's just pages that we create as we go, right? It's not a one-time Word document. Rather, it's pages that we create when we just encounter something and we realize, huh, we need to provide guidance for this because they're not using it the way that we want. Of course, ideally we've prepared all of we could before, but we just create pages and then a big fan of video capsules that support our pages. So whether they're embedded on the pages or they're individual videos themselves, and then we provide that content at the right time and at the right moment in many different ways, right? That's what I've seen. And of course, who says a group of people building that governance site and those videos and maintaining it says an Office 365 group, therefore a Microsoft Teams where people are collaborating to get that done. But I wouldn't tell people to go to Teams to get the governance, if that makes sense. It's more a communication site that I've seen.
Agree. Well, good stuff. I like to try to keep the webinar in time, and it's exactly like half a minute over, I think. So we're gonna end over here. But hey, guys, like Ben said, if you want to email him or if you want to tweet at him or something like that, please welcome to do so. Same with me as well. Mine is asif@visualsp.com. If you'd like to email me or hit me on Twitter at Asif Rahmani. Hey, Ben, thank you very much. This was really a
Thank
lot of
you.
fun.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Don't hesitate and have a great day.
All right. Take care, guys.